There is a spiritual solution to every problem. I believe the definitions I use for spiritual, problem, and solution can form the basis for a unique way of bringing peace and fulfillment into your daily life. It is my contention that once you internalize these concepts, you will rarely revert to the belief that you face insurmountable problems. I think it is important to see spiritual as a part of physical rather than separate these two dimensions of our reality. It is all one. Spirit represents that which we cannot validate with our senses. The real key to understanding spiritual is this idea of our inner world and our outer world. One world, yet two unique aspects of being human. I have a friend who compares the physical to a light bulb and the spiritual to electricity. When I refer to spiritual, I do not intend it to be synonymous with religious. Religion is orthodoxy, rules, and historical scriptures maintained by people over long periods of time. Generally, people are born into religions and raised to obey the customs and practices of that religion without question. These are customs and expectations from outside of the person and do not fit my definition of spiritual. Spirituality is from within. My personal understanding of spiritual practice is that it is a way of making my life work at a higher level and of receiving guidance. The ways in which I do this involve a few simple but basic practices. I have enumerated them here in my own order of significance. Surrender. This is first because it is the most crucial and often the most difficult. In order to surrender, you must be able to admit to being helpless. In surrender, my thoughts are something like this. I simply do not know how to resolve this situation, and I'm turning it over to the same force that I turn my physical body over to every night when I go to sleep. I'm willing to turn any problem over to this invisible force, which is my source, while keeping in mind that I am connected at all times to that source. In other words, the spiritual life is a way of walking with God instead of walking alone. Love. Activating spiritual solutions means converting inner thoughts and feelings from disharmony to love. I use a metaphor of a long cord that is hanging from my hip, and I have the option of plugging that cord into one of two sockets. When I plug into the material world socket, I receive the illusions of disharmony. I feel out of sorts, hurt, upset, anguished, and hopeless in terms of being able to solve or correct my problem. When I am plugged in this way, I struggle to attain false powers. Defining empowerment only in material world terms is a reflection of being spiritually disconnected. When I imagine this cord being yanked from the material world socket and replugged into the spiritual socket, I immediately experience a sense of peace and relief. I can relax and remember that the Spirit is God, which is synonymous with love. Love and love alone dissolves all negativity, much as light dissolves darkness by just its mere presence. The infinite. Awareness of our infinite nature is terrific for putting everything into perspective. When I unplug myself from the material and replug myself into the spiritual, I immediately let go of fear, judgment, and negativity. Infinite love is what I receive from that new energy source. An empty mind. I feel strongly about the need for meditation to nourish the soul and access divine assistance. Beyond the actual act of meditation is a willingness to empty my mind of my agenda and be open to what will inevitably come to me. I relinquish my thoughts to the power that Spirit has to make things work. Completely emptying the mind of our agenda leads to forgiveness. Getting to a state of emptiness means ridding ourselves of all blame and all angry thoughts about what has transpired in the past. There is no room for hanging on to who did what and when and how wrong they were. Generosity and gratefulness. Sometimes I feel the necessity to remind myself that we come into this world with nothing, and we will exit the same way. So finding a spiritual solution involves doing the only thing I can do with my life. That is, giving it away and being simultaneously grateful for the opportunity to do so. Here's a formula which works for me. I get back from the world precisely what I put out to the world, which is another way of stating the proverb, as you sow, so shall you reap. I recommend your spiritual practice involve being generous and grateful with your thoughts. The more you send out thoughts of how may I serve, rather than what's in it for me, the more you will hear back, how may I serve you? The first pathway is called discipline. All right, so this is like you have to train the body. Right? So you have to go to practice.
Yes.
Right? The second, now we're not talking about education here, we're talking about mastery. The second pathway is called wisdom, and that is the application of the mind to what you've trained yourself to do. So if you're going out to learn how to shoot a basket, or to hit a tennis ball, or to make a lemon meringue pie, or dance the Macarena, or anything, the first thing you do is you train your body, you get it in shape, and the second thing you do is you apply wisdom, the mind, to it. Right? Now this is what we mean by education. So that if we send our children off to school, we say to them, get some discipline and use your head. And basically you've got an education.
Yes.
But that's not mastery. The top two levels of mastery include, the third one's called unconditional love. I watched Pavarotti sing at one of the three tenors,
Yes, sure.
concert.
Yes.
42,000 of us at a football stadium in
Wow.
Florida.
Yeah.
And they had a screen on him, Michael, that was 30 feet high. That's 3 stories high, and they showed a close-up of him. Now, this is a man, how many times has he sang O Sole Mio in
Yes.
Italian, all right? There's nobody in the stadium understands Italian, but it doesn't matter. They show a close-up on his face on this 30-foot screen, and he is in bliss. He's
Yes.
just in bliss. And I said to my wife, who was sitting next to me, I said, honey, this guy has obviously gone to practice. I mean, you've got to practice to be the best in the world. And he's also, obviously, he's got great wisdom. He has studied. But that's not what makes him the greatest tenor in the world. I said, look at the love. Oh, solo me. I mean, he was just, every fiber of him was involved in this. He was he was in love with what he was doing. And he wasn't selling us the song, he was selling us the love.
Yes.
That's the third pathway. But the highest pathway, what we really call mastery, is what we call surrender, which is when you get to that place where you realize that this is not you who's doing any of this, that you're not this body, this is not your home, this is not you that's doing it. There's something that you're connecting to called spirit, or consciousness, or higher awareness, and you're allowing God, I guess, if you will, to flow through you and send that out into the world. That's what the highest of them are. I mean, Michael Jordan says, I don't know how I do that, I just surrender.
Yes.
That whole idea of being able to get your ego out of the way. I was just asked the question in South Africa, but they were interviewing me, one of the newspapers there, and the woman hit me with this question. She said, "What's been the greatest accomplishment of your life?" And my ego started really going into, high gear. And I was thinking about, how many books I'd written, how many times I'd appeared on the Tonight Show, or, where I was on bestseller lists and all of this. I wasn't saying a word. I was just sort of rattling all of these things off that my ego wanted to say. And then finally it hit me, and I said to the woman, I think the greatest accomplishment of my life has been my ability to tame my ego, and to no longer see myself as what I have and what I do and what other people think of me. I'm not my possessions. I'm not my accomplishments. I'm not my reputation. I've been able to see myself as a spiritual being, if you will, having that human experience, and that is involved with letting go. As they say in that recovery movement, you let go and you let God. And that may sound trite, but it's really one of the great secrets to being able to attract and manifest into your life. One of the people that I selected in Wisdom of the Ages or selected me, was this man who we don't even know when he was born or when he lived. His name was Patanjali. I'm sure you're familiar with Patanjali, the original Yoga Sutras.
Yes.
And his book, How to Know God.
Yes.
And
wonderful translation by Swami Prabhupada and Christopher Isherwood.
Yes, I have that.
Yeah, it's a great translation of that. Yes.
It's just, every page. I've never read a book that I have. When I read it, I read a page or two, and I set it down, and I can't wait to get back to it. But I don't want to read it because I'm afraid it's going to end. Okay, and that's how I feel about that book.
Right.
Because there's so much masterful kinds of experiences and aphorisms in there that we can apply, and really, really reach these miraculous levels. Anyway, one of the passages that I used from Patanjali was about this concept called inspiration, which is really what we're talking about here, because the word inspiration, of course, comes from in spirit. And the word information comes from inform. So this is the age of information, and there's no shortage of information on this planet. With a computer chip that can put the name and address of everybody in the United States on it, and it's just the size of your thumbnail. We've got plenty of information.
Yes.
But what we have is a spiritual deficit, a deficit of spirit. So Patanjali talked about becoming inspired as a source of, and this is what he said. He said, when you are inspired by some great purpose, some extraordinary project, all of your thoughts break their bonds. Your mind transcends limitations. Your consciousness expands in every direction, and you find yourself in a new and a great and a wonderful world. And then he had this alarming thing to say. I laminated this and carried it with me. He said, dormant forces, faculties, and talents come alive, and you discover yourself to be a greater person by far than you ever dreamed yourself to be. And all you have to do is become inspired, that is, move into the world of spirit. And once we do that, once we leave the form, once we leave the ego, once we leave the idea that I am what I have and what I do and my reputation, what others think of me, and begin to see ourselves as the beloved, as connected to rather than separate from God, and allow that higher spiritual awareness to flow into our lives. I think that's what we mean when we say surrender, when we say let go. I know when I'm writing, if I let go, my writing is blissful and easy. When I struggle with it and I try to think about the right word and so on, I get stuck. Same in an interview, or the same in when I'm speaking on stage, or whatever. When I let go, it's the old aphorism: when the student is ready,
yes,
the teachers appear.
Whenever you're about to act, to do anything, if you have any conflict at all, you can ask yourself the question, is what I'm about to say, is what I'm about to do going to bring me peace, more peace in my life, or is it going to bring a sense of turmoil? Is there going to be some struggle, some anxiety as a result of what I'm going to say or what I'm going to do? If the answer is peace, then it's your highest self. If the answer is turmoil, struggle, anxiety, stress, then the answer is your ego. So now you've identified, and now you know how to act. The way to act is with the way that will bring you peace. Even if it seems inconsistent, the way to act is the way that will bring you peace. The second thing to do is to start to learn to go beyond this restriction that you've experienced in the physical plane. The restrictions of the physical plane are many. Begin to say, I can transcend that. In your mind, begin to look at yourself as living in that physical plane, but that's not who you are. So figure out ways in your own consciousness to just get past all of these limitations that are a part of your body and your world. The third is, wherever you go, refuse to defend yourself to anyone or to anything on the earth plane. You don't have to defend yourself. You don't have to prove yourself. You can just quietly be an effective human being and not get yourself into that position where you're arguing with someone over the rightness of how you feel. Just let go of that. And the higher part of you is saying, I want peace. I want peace. It's always there. Keep that in mind. And finally, learn to surrender and to trust in that wisdom that created you. The act of surrendering is letting go, detaching yourself from all of the beliefs that you have, that it's important for you to be right and it's important for you to prove other people wrong, and all of these kinds of things that keep you sort of in that restriction. Once you surrender and once you let go, you find yourself a whole lot freer in your life. To understand that you have a higher self and to know it and be aware of it is one thing, but to trust in it is quite something else. And the ways to put this principle into practice are, first of all, to keep in mind that you cannot go to a higher ground if you're hanging on to a lower level. That in order to get yourself to a higher place, a place of trust, you have to somehow recognize that all of the stuff that's going on in your life in a lower place is something you have to let go of. You have to trust that when you do let go, you're not going to be falling into the abyss. And I would recommend that you take a real rebellious attitude toward the philosophy which preaches that that you are not connected to the divine energy, that somehow this force that has many names is something that is outside of you, and you're not deserving of it. Until you know that you can trust in it, you can't use it and acknowledge it in your life. One of the things to do to practice this trust is to take the most serious problem that you have and turn it over to God. affirm to yourself, I would like to show my trust in the divine force by simply turning my problems over to your divine hands. I can remember doing this with some of the things that I really struggled with at one time in my life, things that I just thought I couldn't get past. I remember going through relationship difficulties. I remember going through problems with drinking and things like this, where it just seemed like I wanted to get past it, and I just didn't know quite what to do. I can remember times when I would be stuck in my writing and not sure whether I could, and I would just stop and I would just say, all right, I'm going to turn this over. I'm going to trust. I'm going to trust. I'm going to surrender. And this concept of surrender is very, very important. So when you do this, it's just that simple act of getting down on your knees and staying there on your knees and just say, okay, I'm going to turn this over to something that is higher within myself. And the ego seems to go away, and the solution seems to be there for you. The presence of complete trust is evident in your life when you start to think and feel and do are all balanced and they're all in harmony. This is called congruence. If you're congruent, your thoughts and your feelings and your behavior are all in harmony. If you're incongruent, you have one thought about, gee, I'd like to be able to do this, but then you feel another way about it, and then you act in a completely different way. And this is the cause of most of the struggles in our life, and it's also the thing that impedes the free flow of the divine force into your life. You have to trust in yourself. When you're trusting in yourself, you're trusting in this very wisdom that is the source of your life. And when you are congruent within and are feeling congruent, you are also beginning to act congruent. So work on congruency and look at the areas in your life in which you feel yourself to be incongruent. What do I think about this, and how do I feel, and how do I act? And try to bring them into harmony. And you'll start accessing this trust that is absolutely essential to the manifesting process. And of course, as always, you have to begin a meditation practice of contemplating the supreme principle which is beyond the pettiness of this world. And as you meditate and go within and you make conscious contact with God, God isn't something that you know about any longer. God is something that you know directly and personally. And once you have this direct conscious contact, this knowing, then trust is not anything that you'll ever have to work on again. So here are 5 attitudes that I believe that we need to cultivate. The first of these is, I am a human being expressing God without reservation. This is an attitude that says, who I am is particular, is individual, but I am expressing God. And therefore, I am honorable, I am worthy, I count, and I shouldn't be thinking of myself as something that is less than valuable. That's the first. The second is, I accept myself without complaint. I have a slogan that I use in my own life. It says, whenever I hear my children complaining or other people and they ask me for advice, I always say, don't complain, don't explain. Don't complain, don't explain. I accept myself without complaint. I look at the body that I'm in, and I understand that this is nothing more than my curriculum to God. There are things about it that if I were to be designing it myself, perhaps I would have done a little differently. I might have put a little extra hair on the top. I might have made myself a little taller. I might have made myself a little darker. I might have made my eyes a different color, whatever it is. But that isn't up to me. Because who I am is not this thing that I occupy. This is just a garage where I park my soul. And it doesn't matter. It is my curriculum to God. And whether it can see or can't see, whether it's in a wheelchair, whether it's 4'1" or 7'3", whether it's dark or white, whether it's living on the plains of the Kalahari, or whether it's living in New Guinea, or in Detroit, or Chicago, it doesn't make any difference. I accept myself without complaint. This is what I showed up in. And not only do I accept myself without complaint, but I accept life without complaining. And all of us have that choice, and we don't listen to that inner voice. That inner voice. I've often said that if prayer is you talking to God, then your intuition is God talking to you. And that intuition is something you want to listen to. And complaining about anything in your world, particularly about yourself, is a way of blocking the free flow of the divine intelligence that is everywhere and wants to be delivering abundance into your life. The third is, and this is a hard one for people, is I take full responsibility for my life. I take full responsibility for my life. You see, if you are disconnected or feel disconnected from the divine source, you cannot manifest. The separation is what keeps you from connecting. You can't align yourself. Not taking responsibility for your life and anything in it. And I get letters from people who feel that I shouldn't be saying this, because people who have illnesses that they can't do anything about, they don't want to have to take responsibility for them. Or people who have been victims of abuse and things like this, don't want to take responsibility for them. Taking responsibility doesn't mean that you feel guilty about anything that has come your way. It means that I have attracted this into my life in some way that I don't understand. It has showed up in my life, and it's my life. And I want to be able to ensure that these things don't show up anymore. And also I want to be able to send them out of my life. But I can't do it if I don't assume a kind of responsibility for them. No guilt. And the fourth one is, I take on no guilt. If to feel worthy, you don't take on guilt. Just taking on this sense of responsibility. If I get anything in my body, that if it's a hernia, if it's an ache, if it's a pain, if it were a cancer, if it were arthritis, if it's I can't sleep, if it's a cold, if it's a backache, if it's a headache, whatever it is, I am going to say, there's something in me that has attracted this. Rather than, I don't know how this happened, I'm just a victim. These kind of things happen. We live in a carcinogenic world, and these kind of things just happen. It's like the minute that you take responsibility for it, you connect to the divine source, which can heal it. The minute that you say, I had nothing to do with this, then you put that barrier up there, and you're disconnected from the healing of it. So I'm not talking, I want to re-emphasize, I'm not talking about feeling guilty about it. I'm talking about saying, it's here, I've experienced it, I can do something with it. I can either go back to that stage of being an athlete and being a warrior and say, it's all in my ego, or I can do something profound about it, which is to say I can teach and become a statesman and a spiritual being by teaching others how to avoid having this happen. It came to me for a reason. I don't have to understand it, but I take responsibility for it. No guilt, no abdicating the person who was responsible for it and saying, oh, it wasn't their fault. None of that. No removal of the punishment that the person deserves for that kind of conduct. None of that. Simply taking responsibility and saying, I now connect to whatever it is that's in my life, and I no longer am going to carry around the anguish and the guilt there, any place in my life. As soon as you do that, you honor your worthiness to receive the healing, to receive the abundance, to receive the love that might have been missing from your life. The fifth and final affirmation or attitude to create for ourselves a sense of being worthy is to have congruency in your life. Congruency. I understand the importance of harmony between my thoughts, my feelings, and my behaviors. Very often, most of the problems that we face as people come from our inability to have congruency or harmony exist between what I think, what I feel, and how I behave. I may think one thing, I may feel something else, and then behave in a different way. And to have a congruency is to honor your worthiness. Virtually all addictions come from an incongruency. I have a thought about one thing, I feel something else, and then I behave in a different way. And that incongruency is what keeps us from feeling worthy.
In reading the aphorisms of Patanjali, He was talking, now you have to remember, we're talking about before the Middle Ages, which were called the Dark Ages. And here was Patanjali writing about the ability to be able to do absolutely miraculous things. The ability to be able to be in more than one place at the same time. The ability to be able to be in the presence of another human being and raise your energy to such a level that you could literally, by your presence alone, just heal that person. The ability to be able to transcend things like diseases. The ability to be able to have the gift of fish and loaves. To just live at such a level of consciousness that anything you placed your attention on instantaneously, you had the capacity and the power to be able to make that realization for you. The book is called How to Know God. Now, it's not called How to Know About God. It's not called How to Believe in God. It's called How to Know God. And How to Know God means making conscious contact with God. It's the only way you can know anything. So here are the 5 aphorisms. The first is called, the central act of ignorance is false identification. The central act of ignorance is called false identification. What does Patanjali mean by false identification? And what does he mean by ignorance? Ignorance is not to be assumed to mean that you are uninformed. It means that you are identifying yourself as a human being with your body and your possessions and this material world. And the central act of that ignorance is the identification falsely with this world of the changing. But beyond the world of the changing is the changeless world. And once you start to identify yourself there and know that this is who you are, know it, like you're listening right now and you're watching, and the energy that is coming into you is coming through your eyes and ears and senses. And it is only your eyes and your ears and your senses that take this energy and twist it into something called evil or problems. It comes into your eyes, these energies, and into your ears, if it could be examined just before it hits your eyes, and just before it reaches your ears, and we could examine it very carefully, you would find that the scientists would say, no, there's no problems in that energy. There's no evil in that energy. Nope, it's just energy. It's just a frequency, it's vibrating at a certain speed. But as soon as it hits your senses, and you begin to interpret it, problems begin to show up in your life. But the energy itself contains no problems. It's just energy. That's proper identification according to Patanjali. That's the first aphorism. The second aphorism sounds like this. The mind of the truly illumined, said Patanjali, is calm, because the peace of God within all things is known, even within the appearance of misery and disease. Even within the appearance of misery and disease. The mind of the truly illumined is always calm. And the mind of the truly illumined understands that the peace of God is in all things. You are in this world, but what? You are not of this world. That is not who you are. You are not of this world, even though you're in it. So you're filling out the forms, you send in your money to the IRS, and you stop at the red lights, and you obey the laws, and you follow the rules, that is, most of them, which seem to make sense, and the ones that don't, you're able to ignore, which you have to, otherwise we'll never have any growth. The third aphorism is quite simple, and it's one that's most troubling to many people in the West. Patanjali said, sin is non-existent. Sin is non-existent. There are only obstacles to one's ultimate union with God. You do not sin. When you behave toward another person in a harmful way, when you steal from another person, when you violate any of the commandments or whatever, you have not sinned. You have created an obstacle to your union with God. But you see, the reason we don't want to put sin in there, according to Patanjali, is because it creates shame and guilt. Shame computes the absolute lowest in whether you're going to be strong or weak in your life. Shame is the lowest frequency emotion that is possible. It only computes at 25 on a scale of 1 to 1,000. The fourth aphorism that leads us into a spiritual solution to every problem sounds like this. And these last two are the ones that I absolutely resonate to and love the most. The person who is steadfast in his abstention from falsehood has the power to obtain for himself and others the fruits of good deeds without having to perform the deeds themselves. Steadfast in abstaining from means that you never waver and you never have thoughts of falsehood, that is, identifying yourself as a material being rather than a spiritual being. And when you become steadfast in that, when you say to someone, God blesses you, they are blessed by your presence when you have that kind of consciousness. And you present yourself to someone and you are absolutely steadfast in abstention from falsehood. And in the presence of such a person, healing takes place. And blessing takes place. And the fifth aphorism, my favorite of all, says, when a person is steadfast in his abstention from harming others, then all living creatures will cease to feel enmity in his or her presence. So when you become steadfast in your abstention from ever having a thought of harm directing at other people, and that's how you walk through the world, butterflies will land on your shoulder. Birds will not be afraid of you. Little dogs, or even vicious dogs, will become domesticated by being in your presence. All living creatures, babies, will goo-goo and come to you. You know people like this, don't you? And what you'll do is set into motion these dormant forces, which will collaborate with you because you're in spirit rather than in form. Here are some of the signposts of a new direction. Your ego is less insistent on having attention placed on it. There was a time when I could dominate every conversation, no matter where I was, no matter who I was with, and if I was with my wife or whatever, and I could be glib and verbal and use quotations and talk and get people to gather around and endlessly take the spotlight. Today I find myself hardly ever talking. I just love to sit back and watch and listen and observe and notice. Secondly, doing less, not more. Letting go and letting God becomes easier for you. Practicing non-interference. Boy, when I was writing Change Your Thoughts, Change Your Life and living that part of the Tao, I remember reading one of the verses and thinking, it says, great sages do nothing, and because they do nothing, they get so much more done. And I just couldn't wrap my head around that, or my consciousness around that I could do less and get more done. I mean, we've grown up in a world where you have to go out and do more in order to get more. It says in the Tao, great sages accomplish great things by thinking small rather than thinking big. That a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And the great sage just thinks of the single step and where they are. You get to a place where you're not trying so hard, but you're not failing at anything. You're just producing results. And you're not willing to judge the results. And it gets easier. Trying less. You begin to shun the spotlight. You begin to practice what the Tao taught me to practice, which is radical humility. Not taking credit, giving other people credit,
not needing to have other people tell you how wonderful you are. Just simply practicing what the ocean teaches us. Stay low and let everything come to you. Unity begins to replace separation. Conflict then is eliminated. Remember, the mind at war with itself can never know God. Because knowing God means knowing oneness. And oneness means nothing to be in conflict with. You cannot be in conflict when you have oneness. There's only one. And we begin to see ourselves as connected to everything. Now, also on this voyage of two, and I just have to speak a few moments about this, it is what I call the fall. Virtually every spiritual advance that I've ever made in my life has been preceded by a fall of some kind or another. And I think you can expect a fall. And when you're in one, when you're in a low point, when you're struggling, the Tao says that built into all misfortune is good fortune. And built into all good fortune is misfortune. So that when you're in a place of misfortune, low, your relationship isn't working, the finances aren't coming, the news about your body, the medical diagnosis, things aren't the way you want them to be, all of the falls. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had a wonderful quote. She said, if you shield the mountain from the windstorms, you'll never see the beauty of the carvings. So the idea really isn't to try to eliminate the storms of your life. The idea is to learn how to sing in the rain, how to dance in the storms, and be willing to go into the storm. And the final thing about this journey back, I talked about it in the film, is called the quantum moments. And these are moments in our lives that really shift us, and they almost always come after a fall. So you have the fall, that as you have one of these falls, what you are doing is you are generating energy to propel yourself over the bar. If you remember in the film, I spoke about the night that I had one of the most shameful nights of my life, when I required my wife and our 5 little children, we had 5 children in 8 years, and they had closed the bar at the restaurant because someone the night before had served someone underage, and they wouldn't give me a beer with my meal. And I made everybody in the family be inconvenienced and get up and go to another restaurant because I was upset because I couldn't have my beer. Now that's a jerk. That's shameful behavior. It's hard for me to even admit it, but I'm better than I used to be. Now I'd only make them go 2 blocks instead of 3. No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. And that morning, after that fall provided me with the energy. I began to think about myself. And what was I doing? How long has it been, Wayne, since you've gone without having a beer in the evening? I couldn't think of a day in the previous 2 decades. And what are you doing making your wife, who's had 5 children with you in 8 years, move? And you know what it means to move little children like that? You know, with all of the things that you have to take and put them in the cars and the seat belts and all of that, and none of it mattered to me. But that fall allowed me probably to be alive today. Because if I would have kept drinking the way I was, I wouldn't be alive today. It was going to kill me, because alcohol's like sugar. I mean, it's loaded with sugar, by the way. So these falls, when you have one, start looking for the energy and start seeing what it can bring to you as you move back.
The following principles represent my personal view on how your mind and your subsequent behavior can move you from toxic energy levels of the material world into the level of spirit, wherein lies the solution to any and all problems. Practice the presence of spirit. Practice awareness of the impossibility of being outside of the omnipresent spirit. Some ways of doing this are to remind yourself when you first awaken that this is a day that God will be with you at all times. Every meal you eat, be mindful of what it took for that food to reach your plate. When you make a phone call, drive in your car, or enter your workplace, begin to have this God realization. As you practice being mindful of the presence of the divine invisible spirit, you will notice a greater sense of peace, a stronger feeling of being safe and secure, a knowing that you are healthy and living from an inner sense of integrity. These feelings result from simply silently practicing, and I emphasize silently. No preaching and converting others to think as you do. Simply realize the presence of your source from which you are never truly separated, except in your own mind. Your mind is the substance of all matter. Take a look at your right hand. Would you describe it as intelligent? No, because intelligence is the mind that directs your hand to move, to grasp, to make a fist, or wave goodbye. Your hand responds to the directives of your mind. Now think about every other organ of your body, your heart, liver, spleen, all of which were created to act in accordance with the central divine intelligence within them. If you so elect, your entire body will respond to the directives of your mind. Direct, insist, demand if you must, that your mind be in harmony with the divine mind, and your energy will go from slow to fast, from material to spiritual, from problems to solutions. Mortal sense needs to yield to make room for spiritual awareness. When confronted with a problem, stop in the middle of it and remind yourself that God is on the field and that you can surrender to that realization. I received a letter from a woman who was diagnosed with cancer and given only a few months to live. She decided to keep this information from everyone she knew, including her husband and children. She rented a cabin in the northern Minnesota woods and spent every day silently yielding her mortal sense and opening herself to spiritual guidance. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, with every day devoted to communing silently with God and releasing her attachment to her body and the cancer that had invaded it. She began to feel stronger as she no longer identified herself with her body. When she returned to her home, she never again even visited a medical facility. Today she thrives some 9 years after her terminal illness diagnosis. The commitment to yield her mortal sense and allow the calm, peaceful, serene, loving presence of God to handle the cancer was what she intuitively felt was her pathway to healing. Send love to and pray for your enemies. Harboring anger and hatred toward anyone guarantees that you remain in low energy fields where problems will continue to crop up in your life. I suggest that you examine every relationship in which you feel judgmental thoughts of anger and hatred. Replace those thoughts with energies of acceptance, kindness, and love. You will have to make a personal commitment to, first of all, notice what you are feeling, and then exercise your ability to choose to send love. When your heart becomes pure, your enemy becomes your friend, or even more significantly, your teacher. Your worst enemies are your greatest teachers because they allow you to examine the emotions of anger and revenge, and then to transcend them. They give you the exact tools you need to elevate yourself to the spiritual energies that provide your solutions. God is not withholding. Imagine for a moment that you know a person who has stored away everything you want or need for your happiness, but refuses to let you have them unless you do his bidding, ask properly, and behave as he wants you to. Furthermore, this person can heal you of the disease, but allows you to suffer for now, and maybe will consider healing you at some future date. This would not be a very nice person, let alone a very nice God. Is this the kind of withholding God that you imagine the spiritual energy to be? In the scriptures it clearly says, "And everything I have is yours." These 6 little words may be the secret you've been looking for to raise your awareness to a spiritual level. Whatever solution you seek for whatever problem you may have is available to you in this moment. It is in you, not in some mythical Santa Claus-like being floating around in the heavens, dispensing goodies to some and baddies to others. You are always connected to this universal source of present moment energy. You are not being punished. Just as God does not withhold, God does not punish. The idea that God could be punitive is inconsistent with spiritual awareness. It is a mistake of the ego or the intellect to believe there is evil for which God must punish you. You correct an error by bringing truth to it. The idea that God will condemn you is not consistent with a God of forgiveness. You believe either in one power or two. The power of one is the power of love. Evil exists first as a thought of non-good or non-God, and then it is that thought which is acted upon. But it's all an error. If it's not good, it's not of God. And if it's not of God, it can't exist, since everything is of the one power we call God. You can correct all of the errors of your belief in separation from God by bringing that higher, loving energy to those areas of your life that are plagued with problems. They are not punishments. Rather, think of them as errors to be corrected.
Let's now examine the elements that most of us agree define the essence of our Creator, along with how they can help us sensibly approach Him. 1. God is love. We came from love, and we desire to return to that heaven while still on earth. I repeat Emerson's appropriate observation that love is our highest word and the synonym for God. In other words, if we dwell in love, we dwell in God. If God is love and cannot be anything other than what God is, and we wish to have a dialogue with God, then it seems to me that we come to our source in love, or we're wasting our time. So in the private, quiet, prayerful moments of asking for God's help, don't ask Him to help defeat others in any way. Rather, pray, Dear God, make me an instrument of Thy love. I want to be like You. I have forgiven them, and I have forgiven myself. And remember that there can be no forgiveness without love. And without love, there can be no way of being heard by our source. 2. God is peace. One of the most quoted verses in the Old Testament, which may also be my favorite biblical offering, is this: Be still and know that I am God. So a corollary of this might then be agitated and turbulent, and you will never know God. Along with praying or communing with our source with peace in our heart, we must be still. This means taking time to get quiet before meditating, and also monitoring our breathing. As we exhale, we can train ourselves to let go of all of our non-peaceful thoughts, and as we inhale, we can breathe in spirit. We can keep reminding ourselves that all of the non-peace that's in the world is not of God. It's of ego. Then we can ask to be helped back to His peace. This approach will attract the assistance we're requesting. It's all about matching up the vibrational energy of our desire for peace with thoughts and behaviors that are consistently peaceful with those desires. 3. God is all-inclusive. We won't be heard by or receive assistance from our source if we're touting our separateness from our fellow humans. You see, when we seek special individual favors from God, or even when we seek to converse with our source from this perspective, we're once again living an illusion. If God were to acknowledge our belief in separation, perfect oneness wouldn't and couldn't exist. It's impossible for a source that creates everyone, and therefore is in everyone, to even have a dialogue with someone who's harboring ideas of their specialness or separation from everyone else. In conversing with our source, as always, we strive to be more like it. So we need to see ourselves as connected to everyone in the universe as we enter into prayer. Then we can ask for guidance and assistance in summoning the all-inclusive Spirit. Make me an instrument of You. Allow me to see You in everyone I encounter. Help me to see myself in others and to extend first to them what I aspire to myself. I've noticed that this is how You are, and I wish to be just like You. The key is getting past your ego-based idea of separation and instead seeing yourself as a part of the oneness of all. As Thomas Aquinas put it so succinctly, true peace consists in not separating ourselves from the will of God. 4. God is abundance. As St. Paul once said, God is able to provide you with every blessing in abundance. So why is there so much apparent shortage in the world, including people starving and living in poverty, and millions of folks having the persistent problem of too much month left at the end of the money? Well, what I can say for certain is that God is not to blame. There's more than enough to go around. After all, we came from a place that knows nothing of deprivation, and we arrived on a planet that has the capacity to grow the food and slake the thirst of every one of its inhabitants many times over. As a species, we human beings have brought the ideas of deficiency and depletions of God's gifts on ourselves, largely by taking very ungodlike actions. God serves all of us,
but our greed has made us forget others and focus only on ourselves. As a people and as individuals, we've brought lack to our lives, and we can only fix this deficiency by becoming more like our always serving, endlessly abundant spiritual source. The answers to the resolution of poverty and scarcity are readily available to us, and they'd be resolved tomorrow if we remembered that we're all one on this planet. We all share the same origins, and we all end up back in the same non-place where we began. When we return to spirit in our heart, our governments will align with this truth, and our leaders will emerge from in-spirit consciousness. And 5, God is well-being. Spirit never has a fever and knows nothing of illness. So in my humble opinion, it makes no sense to pray or engage in a discourse with God from a perspective of asking to be healed, unless, that is, we have a firm understanding of what we mean by the word heal. If we mean to overcome an illness or infirmity, then I feel that we're again violating the truism that nothing can be what it isn't, including God. On the other hand, if we use the word heal to mean reconnecting to our source of well-being, then we're open to the potential of receiving assistance to overcome any infirmity. And that's how I use the word. I never asked God to help me to get over a feeling of sickness. Even when I had a minor heart attack 5 years ago, I asked to be made an instrument of God's well-being. I acknowledged that my body had taken on non-well-being, be it from my lifestyle, diet, and habits, or the toxins I breathe in and out, whatever. It was not of God, it was of me in this physical world, and I prayed to be reunited to a stream of well-being. I knew that I was a piece of God, and it was just as easy for him to heal a cut on my finger as it was to restore my heart to a healthy state. Since I knew that God's healing power was within me, I just needed to help my body remember this.